the subtle traits of a people pleaser come into that, because you want to be perfect. So you want to say yes to everything, and because you don't want them to think that you don't know what you're talking about, which means then that you can't hold boundaries. Work pollutes into everything else. You give yourself completely to your work, including your identity, your sanity, your health, your relationships. And you expect your employer to hold the boundaries, or you expect your boss to hold the boundaries for you because you don't have the internal strength to hold it yourself.
Hello and welcome to the Stroke It podcast. I'm Alday Townsend, your host. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited for you to be inspired to live your life fully, to take ownership of your time, your schedule, and your life, but most importantly, learn and grow and develop personally and professionally. Myself and others are going to share life lessons that we've learned through leadership, through heartache, through pain, through struggles, and we'll be sharing some success stories with you as well. Super eager for you to dive in, learn, and grow, and once again, just take ownership of your life today. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Alday Townsend, your host. You're in for a treat. I'm so excited to speak with Joe. I was reading through the show notes and everything that we are going to share with you. And it's a new year. And I know many people are maybe thinking, oh, was 2024 the pregame for 2025? Because ever since 2025 has happened, it has been chaos. It's been maddening. It's been stressing. I'm feeling burnt out. So having Joe on the podcast today is going to give me some hope, and I'm sure it's going to give you some hope as well. Joe is a former corporate executive turned entrepreneur and the founder of the Balance Institute. After burnout led to her to the hospital, Joe rebuilt her life by redefining success and prioritizing self-care. She now helps ambitious women overcome burnout, rewire subconscious patterns, and create meaningful, balanced lives. Joe, I'm super excited. Obviously, I'm already stumbling over my words because I'm like, what does she have to teach us today? Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you.
That's all right. Thank you for having me on the show.
So before we get going and you sharing all of this wisdom and knowledge that you have, do you mind sharing with our guest who you are a little bit more? Where do you live? What season of life are you in? We really want to connect with you.
Yeah, well, if you couldn't tell from the accent, I live in Australia. So living in the future, I always say to those in the US, so I can see the future for you. I founded the Balance Institute 6 years ago after a 20-year corporate career. So was in the corporate world, worked for global insurance companies, and rose up the ranks quite quickly. But yeah, I've since the last 5 years been an entrepreneur. I also have two girls who are 14 and 16. 14 and 11. It feels like they're 16. Let's just say we're right in the teen phase and tween phase of life, and also have a husband, and we just celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary, and we've been together for over 20 years. So
wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Congratulations. And the teens, oh my goodness. So I own a child-based business. And I thought the teens were going to be the struggle. What I'm finding is the 8-year-olds to the 12-year-olds. These young ladies are they need serums and moisturizers, and they want makeup, and they want all this. I'm like, you're 8 years old. This little girl's 7.5. She's going to be 8. And this is all the things she wants for her birthday. She wants the eyelash curlers. What is up with this?
I know. Well, my 11-year-old is more that way inclined. My teenager is not necessarily into that, but yes, the 11-year-old wants all of the things, and I'm there going, you're 11. I'm not. You don't need. She's retinol, and I'm like, no, you have plenty of collagen. You don't need. Oh well, my friend says I need collagen. No, you're 11.
I have to tell you, I didn't even start wearing makeup until I grew up on a farm, so I didn't even start wearing makeup till my freshman year. But washing my face, putting moisturizer on, actually caring for my skin was probably my early 30s. So it's what in the heck is happening to these young kids? I guess it's TikTok and all the socials. And in a way, it's that's great that they're starting to care for their skin, I guess, at a young age. But I'm this body image that some of them have already at such a young age is kind of sad, and I'm just kind of worried about them. So anyways, yeah. So cheers to you, all of the mothers that have young women. I have no children. I'm thank God, because I couldn't even imagine. So anyways, okay. So we're not talking about children on this podcast. We're talking about burnout and how you're going to empower us and help us with our own relationships with ourself and boost confidence, I'm sure. So I always love talking a little bit about the love languages. It's kind of part of the story and part of my whole concept with the Stroke It. How familiar are you with the love languages?
Know them very well.
Okay. How were you introduced to them?
Oh gosh, it was probably 10 years ago through a coach that I was working with at the time. And they said, "Oh, what's your love language?" I said, "Oh, I've heard of them around the place." And yeah, obviously went and did an online test and went, "Oh, that makes so much sense in terms of what I want." And understanding my kids' love language is my husband's. And yeah, interestingly, my husband and I are both the same. Our
You
primary
are?
love language
Wow. Okay. I've
is
never talked to anyone
typically,
the same.
oh, really? So
Mhm.
we're both typically acts of service as our primary love language, but then his secondary and possibly equal then goes to touch. It's very typical for most men, and mine more typically goes to words of affirmation.
Awesome. Well, that makes sense too if you're an entrepreneur too. I feel like a lot of times, we are leading our own organizations and we're having to like, tell everybody else how amazing they are or validate all of their feelings or like you're on the right track. I know it seems like you're failing, but you're on the right track. And I feel like, as entrepreneurs, sometimes we need that encouragement because we don't necessarily get that from like the top since we are the top.
Yeah, and I'm also a very big extrovert, so I like words. Words are my thing. In terms of often been my gift. It's been how I tell stories. It's everything. And so when you want almost what you have reflected back at you, and I've married a very strong introvert who often doesn't like talking, so we're very much the yin and the yang. So sometimes I say to him, "What I would love you to say right now is this," and he goes, "Okay, all right, we'll do it."
You guys sound like my husband and I. My husband's a total introvert, like total homebody, like doesn't want to have a lot of conversations. But I have enough energy and enough conversations for both of us and probably 5 kids. So we're good.
Yeah.
So anyways, so awesome. Well, I'm excited for you to share a little bit about your work with us and really encourage us to discover ourselves and really get started. So let's go straight into the yourself section of the podcast and how you're encouraging people to discover, stop self-sabotaging them, and maybe even start with like how you got into this work a little bit more so we can understand, because I'm assuming that you went through this journey and that's why you're helping other people.
Yeah, absolutely. As very typical of many entrepreneurs in this space. So my story was quite typical of many sort of ambitious women. I climbed the corporate ladder. I had kids sort of in my 30s, as is very typical. And I found myself in my early 30s and I'd achieved my career success. I wanted to have a chief in my title, make it to the C-suite, as we say. So I was a chief marketing officer. I was in a global company. I had an Asia Pacific role, which was the thing I wanted. I had a seat on a not-for-profit board. I had built my own house, which is very much the Australian dream. I had 2 new cars in the garage. I had a husband. I had the 2 children. And I was looking at my life and thinking, I've ticked off everything that I said I wanted. I meant to be happy. This is what I've been striving for a really long time, and it's what I would have bet $1 million on. If you do all these things, then you'll be happy. You get the career. I had a big team. I had big budgets. I was in theory, but there was something missing. There was this emptiness inside, even though there's almost a loneliness. I now know that was disconnection from myself, but I was never alone. I had 2 young kids. I was working crazy hours. I was traveling a lot. I was exhausted. I was constantly guilty, running all the time, running on fumes, not taking care of myself. And if I was taking care of myself, I was almost beating myself into submission. So I decided in between children, I'm going to go do triathlons. So I was training in 3 disciplines, getting up at 4 a.m. and riding a bike and running to the pool and swimming on top of then, traveling to China for work and then coming back and feeding a child. And so I just kind of high achieved myself into the ground, which is very common.
I just don't, I'm like, my eyes are so big right now because I'm like, oh my God, how are you doing all of these things? Are you human?
Sometimes I wonder, maybe not.
Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
And so I found myself in this situation, having, bought the big house and just going, something is missing. And in the end, I did what most high achievers, I dreamt of, do we just blow everything up and move to the country and start an antique store? And can we have a simpler life? Why does life feel so hard and complicated? And in the end, I said, all right, well, let's just, I started blowing things up. I thought, I can't keep living this way. I'm completely out of alignment. I wasn't using that language at the time, but something's wrong. Like I've got to fix something. So, all right, well, let's sell the house. It was meant to be the forever house. Let's sell it. And I sold it, the forever house, after 18 months. And we downsized. So I moved to a smaller house. I moved further out of the city and thought, all right, let me take the financial pressure off, because I was very much trapped on the treadmill of having to meet mortgage payments and need a big salary. And okay, well, what if I take that pressure off? Didn't really help that much. All right, well, maybe it's the job. Let me quit the job. Let me try to find another job. Ended up starting some consulting work. Okay, well, oh, hang on, it's kind of it, but it's not. All right, let me. And so my husband and I were going through a difficult point at that time. He'd lost his mother suddenly in an accident, so he was grieving and having mental health issues. So, all right, well, and in the end, I changed everything outside of myself, until eventually I realized that, okay, the only thing left to change has to be me.
I have goosebumps right now.
So blowing everything up didn't work, and I did blow everything up, but then things only started to shift when I was able to take my, I guess you would say, my core gift. When I worked in corporate, I was in marketing and innovation and a range of different fields. But my gift, when I learned to distill it, was to actually go into something that was broken and complicated, pull it apart and put it back together again in a way that made sense. Whether that was a marketing campaign, whether that was how a department was structured, whether that was a product. And so what I did was I took that skill that I had in the corporate world and applied it to my own life. So I took myself apart and went, okay, what actually are the pieces that are really mine? I learned a lot about neuroscience. I learned a lot about subconscious mind conditioning. And oh, hang on a second, that's actually not me. That's something that my parents thought of me, or that's what society said of me. And so I pulled it all apart, looked at all the tools I had in my toolkit, because for much of my career, I was considered one of those high potentials. I'd been on every leadership program, on all the retreats, and I'd had all of the support. So I had folders and folders and workbooks and okay, well, there was this model, there's this psychometric assessment I've been through. That tells me this about myself. That tells me, okay, well, what of that? Okay, those two. So I kind of just pulled everything apart and then put my life back together and worked out, what are the pieces of me that I want to keep? What are the pieces of me that I actually want to leave behind? And what are the tools that I need to actually be happy in the life that I've got? Because kids don't go back. Wanted to try to keep the husband, still loved working. I've never been a stay-at-home mum. Work is a huge part of my DNA. So how do I step into that identity and actually embrace the truth of who I am rather than pretending that I'm not? So that was the journey that led me.
I don't mean to be speechless. I'm just like, wow. It's a lot. And I think that took probably a lot of bravery, and for you to just kind of quit all the things and then have to like basically restart all over, and then kind of like strip that down from you as well, which is challenging itself. And I feel like were you like questioning everything that you were doing at that point?
I was. There was something deeper guiding me, but I still remember the night before the auction of our house, and that was sort of the first piece to be blown up. And everyone else had gone to bed, and I'm sitting in my lounge room looking out at this beautifully lit garden where I'd planted every single plant and I'd chosen every plant, and I'm sitting there in my house that looks like a show home because it's got furniture in it that's not mine, and just sitting there playing my music, bawling my eyes out, going, am I really going to quit the race? Like, am I really doing this? Because I was basically saying I'm tapping out of the race for the Joneses. We hadn't bought a house at that time. So I sold my house with 2 young kids, having nowhere to go. And I just had to have faith that this is the path. If we're meant to sell, we're going to sell, and I'll find something. I can go rent somewhere. I'll find something. Everyone thought I was nuts. What do you mean you can't sell without having bought first? You have 2 kids. My parents almost doing interventions, going, this is irresponsible. Why are you doing this? And me saying, there's just, I have to. I don't know why, but there's something driving me. And yeah, that was incredibly difficult, just bawling my eyes out and processing and almost grieving the life that I thought I wanted. When you have this realization that you've worked really, really hard for a path that you think you want, and the moment you wake up and go, I actually don't want that, you still have to grieve the path that you thought you wanted, because there were so many things caught up in that. So I had to let that go and process it and put it down to then open up to the possibility of what could my life look like having taken this huge foundational pillar away.
And I'm just thinking all the sacrifices that you made and the places you weren't, and then what you had to give up to get to that house. So did you find, and during this process, you were kind of resentful of the decisions you made, or were you like having regret once you got there and decided that wasn't what you wanted?
Well, I'm a very optimistic and forward-facing person.
Okay.
I don't really believe too much in regret. I know we're human and we can have them,
Yeah.
but my thing was, well, I had always wanted to build a house. That was always going to be my dream.
Yeah.
And my husband and I, even on some of our early dates, if we ever had time away from kids, or even when we were traveling, we'd be in a bar and we'd be sketching floor plans on a napkin. So that was always going to be part of my path. So it was almost like, well, good thing I did it and got it out of the way, because I was probably always going to want to do that. It's almost like an itch that had to be scratched. And I only learnt later on reflection, oh, okay, that's because when I was a kid, my parents built a house, but I didn't have the thing of being able to link. That's why I had that itch, because my parents built a house when I was young, and we then had one of the nice houses on the street. And by having one of the nice houses on the street, I was an only child, which meant that all the kids wanted to come to my house and play. So there was all of this stuff wrapped up in, well, when you have a nice house, people want to play with you, you get friends, you're not bored. So there was all of this association that I wasn't aware of. It was all deeply subconscious, which was driving me to say, well, when you have a nice house, you can entertain, you can have people over, people are going to want to see you. But it wasn't because of the house, it was because of me. But I thought it was because of the house, which is why the drive to have the house was so primal and so strong. So there was regret in terms of, how did I get myself here? But I always have had this deep belief that everything happens for a reason. And even the horrible things and the difficult things and the painful things, I didn't know that experience would end up birthing what I've been doing for the next, the last 5 years. All that pain and heartache and suffering was because I've always been someone who goes first. And I had to go through that because there are millions of other women around the world who are also dreaming of blowing up their life. And by me going through that, I was then able to pay it forward. That allowed me to unlock my purpose. Again, very long journey to find it, but that allowed me to find out what it is that I'm truly meant to be doing, what truly lights me up, and was the genesis of the business and everything I've done since.
Yeah, 100%. My story is not exactly like yours, but this podcast and my book all was inspired by my husband's affair with another woman. And I would never be where I am today, speaking and encouraging and living out who I am today, if it wasn't for that episode as well. Like, that episode pulled me out of my business to where I could find out who I am and who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go. And if it didn't happen, I probably would still be on that hamster wheel, working so hard, having no personal life, having no real good relationships, and I would be divorced. And now I'm like happily married to that husband. So we're on our second marriage to each other, and we have a beautiful marriage, and I'm so grateful. And it was, sometimes you just don't realize what you have until it's gone. And sometimes you have to lose something to really understand how badly you want it and what you're willing to give up and what you're willing to do to keep it as well. And if that wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't have a book, I wouldn't have a podcast, I wouldn't be here talking to you as well. So I'm a true believer in, turning obstacles into opportunities and seeing what the lesson is, and really like leaning into that as well, and transforming and being positive as well. So I align with your story in that regard. So but continue telling us how you blew up your life, and then like how you just like rebuilt it. I'm sure it wasn't like you blew up your life and then like here you're at this level of success and like can speak through that. So do you want to kind of share a little bit of the high points and the low points that inspire your work and kind of share that with us?
Yeah. So after I started the blowing up process, I then started consulting and sort of more in my area, my field within corporate. And it was almost like the universe kept knocking me in different directions. And it was when I was consulting and having all these, supposed work conversations with often women who were in, various heads of roles. I was brought in, to run a project for them, and I still remember there was one week where I had 8 conversations in that same week where the women went from, Jo, I know all this work stuff. I'm burning out. can you help? What, you seem to be okay now. What have you done? What's working for you? You've got two young kids. And I started sharing some of the things that I'd been learning over the last few years of my journey. And they went, oh, wow, that was amazing. And they'd call me back a week later and say, oh, I tried that thing that you said and I'm feeling much better now, or this has now shifted. And I started going, oh, okay, maybe there's something in this. The women like me who are burning out, who maybe I've got different tools because I'd done a lot of understanding of my upbringing, and I had quite a unique upbringing. So, okay, well, there's beliefs that I have that, what do you mean no one else has that same belief as me? Well, what if I could just give them my belief? And what if I could borrow beliefs from other people, and almost just like you go to a lolly store, as we'd say, or a candy store, and pick what you want. There's old-fashioned stores where you one of this and one of this and one of this. Who says I have to have what I've already got? Why can't I pick and mix new ones? And yeah, the journey to then start saying, well, okay, I've gone from advice and it's working. Maybe this could be a thing, was the language I kept saying. And initially I was like, well, I'm a hardcore consultant. Put me in front of 100 people, give me Post-it notes and a whiteboard, my happy place. Well, I'm not a life coach. That's not me. I'm a suit, patent high heels kind of person. I don't run around with flower garlands on my hair and kind of sing to the moon. That was what I thought life coaches were. Yeah, talk about feelings. Like, I ain't got no time for feelings. Like, we need an ROI. So where's the feelings?
Masculine energy. Here we are.
100%, 100%. No time for feelings, all that fluffy stuff. That's rubbish. So that was part of my journey, was understanding about masculine and feminine energy, and how do I better balance the two. And to be honest, that was one of the reasons I ended up calling my business the Balance Institute, because everyone thinks it's about work-life balance, but it's actually about masculine and feminine energy, and about head and heart, and about feelings and thoughts. Everything has to be in balance within us. And so the business ended up almost being born accidentally. Wasn't my intention to become a life coach. I had to do a lot of work on myself to build up the confidence, get some training, be around other people so that I could bring out that side of me, really shift my identity, and again, decide that I'm going to be a different type of life coach. I understand more. I now have floral skirts. I don't have floral garlands, but I've allowed that feminine side of me to come out more, as opposed to, the black suits. I used to always have like bright red earrings or a red belt, or so there was always like this little part of me that was like in there, but I've unleashed her a lot more now.
Are you looking to enhance your relationship with yourself? If so, get the Stroke It Guide. My book is available on Amazon and on my website. Not only is my book going to help you with your personal journey with yourself, but it's also going to help you with the relationships of other stakeholders in your life. For instance, your spouse or partner, your employer, your employees, your friends, or your family members. And of course, because the title, there is a chapter for your pleasure, which is the last one, in the bedroom. The book offers lots of great tools and resources. There's a lot of great downloads, and it features many of my podcast guests, and they have thousands of downloads and resources that are worth a lot of money. So you're going to want to get my book today. You can buy that on Amazon or on my website, and you can change and take ownership of your life today with one simple click.
But being able to be a different...
It's fun though, right? To have her come out. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a fun journey, but being able to balance those sides of me where I can be a coach who has had a 20-year career. I can, my clients call it a love slap. I can hit them where they need it because I know what's going on inside them, but I can also be soft and warm and nurturing and hold beautiful spaces. But because of my background, I do things, people get notes from me and they're in bullet points. I'm like, oh, every other coach I've worked with gives me 6 paragraphs and you give me bullet points and you tell me what I need to do. And you give me because my brain has been so corporatized that I'm able to deliver often fluffy information that's warm and fuzzy in a way that, let's say, women...
clear. Concise.
Yeah, that it's clear, it's concise. Here's your next step. Here's how you use it. So that's been part of my superpower. Again, is taking that complex, fluffy, waffly and making it, succinct and tangible and something that people can actually integrate and on board.
Yeah, I love that. So the woman I was just speaking with before I jumped on with you, she's all about leading with her heart. And we were talking a lot about the feminine, masculine energy as well. And, getting all of the talk out of the head and putting it back into the heart as well. And so there's a lot of similarities as far as the conversations, and we're all on a journey as
Mm-hmm.
well. And her and I were talking about sometimes something like traumatic has to happen for us to get there, and it's unfortunate. So if you were to come in contact with someone that maybe hasn't been burnt out yet, or they're not at the final stages of like giving up and blowing it up, and like they haven't reached that final stage yet, what would you say to them so they don't get to that stage? Or what would you be coaching them on? Or do they need to get to that stage?
I don't think so. I mean, the data says that in terms of what drives us to change, they talk about the 3 Ds. So it's either death, divorce, or disease. And that's what typically drives 90% of change, whether it's you or someone close to you in your circle. And that often only 10 to 20% of change is voluntarily outside of those 3 Ds. And so what becomes really important is for women to understand, how do you not wait for it to get that bad for you to actually say, you know what, I'm going to listen to those signals. I'm going to listen to my intuition. Something feels off. I'm going to make a change before change happens to me. And that's when women often find me, is they're saying, okay, something's not right. I'm starting to feel burnt out. They're smart enough and capable enough. They know where this goes. They've seen friends do it. Maybe they've done it previously, and they don't want to go down that path. So for me, the biggest thing I start to empower women with is building back their self-awareness. We've been so conditioned to look outside of ourselves for feedback. We've become so conditioned to ask for permission before we do anything, to be good girls, to be perfect. The inability to hold boundaries, the procrastination that seeps in, all of these self-sabotage behaviors almost distance us from who we really are. So we have to go on that journey to reawaken that inner voice, to look at our behaviors objectively rather than through the lens that we've been told to look at ourselves. And the moment you start to build up that self-awareness, the moment you're able to really see what's going on, see what's driving you, get to the bottom of those subconscious beliefs and behaviors, then we can now start to make change.
So I feel like I know so many people I want to send the podcast to. And of course, it's like I don't want them to think that you were talking specifically about that, but I just feel like what you're saying is so spot on. I feel like we as women, and there are men too as well, that like they're so focused on becoming this and catering to this person and doing for that person, and they become so focused on everybody else that they lose track of who they are. And then that's when they go and do something that may cost them their marriage, or they, will find a vice that they shouldn't be doing, and all of those things. So, I understand like the whole self-awareness part of it, because I went through that whole journey too and figuring out what you want. But if you could tell them like one thing, or like something on a daily basis, or something to get them to start thinking about becoming more self-aware, like how would you break it down to where they could start maybe understanding that this is what's going on in their life, that it's really like them and needing to be focused on themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, the biggest, I call it muscle, that we need to build is fostering creativity and curiosity. Too often we beat ourselves up. We look at ourselves with negativity. We look at what we're doing wrong. That negativity bias really takes the hold. But I found even asking yourself, to me, one of the most powerful questions is, what am I making this mean? And the moment you start asking yourself that question, I'm really upset right now. What am I making that mean? That person's done this thing to me, or this thing's happened, or my boss has just said this, or my kid's just done this. When you start going, what am I making this mean, usually about me, then you start realizing, oh, the fact that my kid is on their screen, I'm making it mean that I'm a bad mum, because mums should be spending more time with their children, and I'm working and not spending time with my children. Therefore, oh my gosh, I've made the wrong choices. I'm a bad person. So that kid on their screen is a very fast domino to me feeling like a bad person. No wonder I'm triggered every time they pick up their screen.
Yeah.
My husband's sitting on the couch on his phone. I'm doing the dishes. I'm resentful. What am I making that mean about me? He doesn't respect me. He doesn't pull his weight. I don't have a partner who is on equal footing. I've chosen the wrong partner. And then once again, fast track to It's about me. My boss hasn't responded to my email. What am I making it mean? I didn't give them enough information. I did it wrong. There was a typo. Let me go and reread the email that I've already sent that I can't change, just to think about all the million ways that I could have got this wrong and I should have done it better. And we lose all this energy and emotion in things that we can't control, that all because we're making it mean something about ourselves. And simply that question can start to highlight. You often can need some support around this, but even just knowing that question can make you go, oh, wow, I'm making everything mean that I'm a bad person. Is it any wonder that I feel rubbish all the time?
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So, because I want to talk about the employer and the employee, because I can connect with that as well. Is there anything else that you want to kind of highlight in the yourself section, or that you want to speak to the listeners specifically about them, or anything that you can think of that would be really, really beneficial for them to consider as they're moving forward and as they're wanting to lean into either more feminine, masculine energy or finding that balance?
I think really just being clear on the journey to discover who you really are is one that is never ending, but is the journey that we all get to take, not one that we have to do. And the more that we're able to really lean into that quest to uncover who we really are, it's a journey that becomes addictive. It can become very rewarding and fulfilling, and is one that you'll never regret.
Yeah, 100%. I remember getting to the point where I was like content and happy with just who I am versus trying to be all the things, but I had to become very clear on who I was, what I wanted, and who I wanted to share my future with. And then once I was able to get that clarity, then I was able to make decisions, and I was able to serve myself, and I was able, I had to 86 a lot of people in my life. And that's the thing too, is sometimes you just have to 86 or eliminate the negativity and the things that are sucking the life out of you, or that aren't aligning with who you are, or the values that you have too. And I think sometimes we just keep dead weight and people around because we don't want to be alone, or we don't know who we are as well. So I think those are also really important to consider too.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So I want to move into like the employer, and then I want to move into the employee section of it. And when you're talking about the high achievers are more likely to engage in self-sabotage behaviors that damage their reputation at work and cause them to overwhelm and find the burnout, I would like to know what like your views are, and the trifecta that you mentioned.
Yeah. So I've seen a very recurrent pattern, and I've worked very intimately with over 400 women who have come through my signature program. So these are now very well trodden. I've had lots of lawyers, I've had doctors, I've had executives all through, and these patterns are everywhere. So from a work perspective, we've got this high achiever DNA that often comes with, I call this the trifecta of self-sabotage. And this is what has often made our high achiever worked to a point early on in our career, but it reaches a tipping point where it now becomes toxic, and it now becomes dangerous to our future and will really cause us to plateau. So the first one is perfectionism. And this is our high standards. This is our desire for it to be perfect. And I thought that was a lot of key to my success. I could do the work better than anyone. I could spot an errant font from across the room. There'd be a presentation and I'd go, that A is in Times New Roman, not Calibri. And I was like, how do you see that? And oh, no, those boxes aren't left aligned. Somebody didn't do that right. So I was incredibly judgmental and had a lot of all or nothing thinking. It had to be perfect or bust. And again, I thought that was my reputation was built on those high standards. But all that perfectionism is, as the wonderful Brene Brown says, is, a 20-ton shield that was protecting me from getting hurt. So no one ever saw the real me. I was never able to fail, to be vulnerable, to be human, because I was so concerned with keeping up this front that I had it all together, that I was okay, that I was perfect. When you are a perfectionist, and most women are to some degree, we might not be perfectionistic about our appearance, but we're perfectionistic about our emails. It can be ruthless in where it appears. There's no better way to avoid making a mistake than to never begin. And so perfectionism always comes with procrastination. Those two things always live together, because you will be terrified of making a mistake. You'll be terrified of getting it wrong. And so you will, oh, look, there's a load of laundry I need to do. Let me just check what's in the news for today. Oh, let me look at the, Harry Potter stars of where are they now? And suddenly 25 minutes is gone. And oh no, then we end up on this cycle of cortisol and adrenaline fueled deadlines in order to get what we need to get done. So procrastination and perfectionism always come together. And then the third piece of that is when we live our lives worrying about letting people down, saying yes when we don't want to, swimming in resentment, then we have a lot of elements of those people-pleasing behaviors, which, whether people resonate with the word people pleaser or not, the subtle traits of a people pleaser come into that, because you want to be perfect. So you want to say yes to everything, and because you don't want them to think that you don't know what you're talking about, which means then that you can't hold boundaries. Work pollutes into everything else. You give yourself completely to your work, including your identity, your sanity, your health, your relationships. And you expect your employer to hold the boundaries, or you expect your boss to hold the boundaries for you because you don't have the internal strength to hold it yourself.
You're talking my language right now. These are all things that I've going. These are all things I've been going through recently, to be honest with you. Like even like the perfectionism, like, I never thought of myself as a perfectionism, but like some of my team members are like, you're so critical and you're like focusing on this and you're focusing on that and you're not focusing on the how happy the customers are and the smiles and the impact. And I'm like, I want high quality. Like, if you want to earn more money, we've got to increase our wages, which means we have to add more value, which I feel like we need to add more quality, and it needs to be at a higher level. And, I very much pushing that versus like the customers are super, super happy. Like they're buying our employees gifts. They're buying us company dinners. Like, they're the ones paying for all the holiday parties at this point, because they want to do so much for our staff because they so appreciate it. And so the reason I'm like, yeah, this is just totally me the last 3 weeks, and I had one person quit, then I had to terminate 2 people all within the past like 3 weeks. And a lot of it has to do with the perfectionism. And then there's that procrastination too, where it was like, I just kept thinking everything's gonna be okay. And then now it's like, you got to fix it. I got to get it all going, because there was not even on my end, but on my team members too, where it was like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. They weren't working on the rocks, the high level, the major task, because we all got muddled like with all the other little things. So, and a lot of it is, I don't want to have conflict with them. I wasn't holding them accountable because I wanted to make sure they were happy, and I wanted to be people pleasing, all these. So it's like, things that you're talking about, I could completely relate. And I'm sure many people listening to as well can relate, which I will say, it's one of the reasons why I feel burned out right now. And I'm just like, I met with a mentor yesterday. He's like, you're so different. He's like, you seem defeated. You seem disengaged. You're not passionate about the work that you're doing anymore. Like you've always been like fierce and on fire and like know where you're going. He goes, you seem lost. And I was like, I didn't cry, but I really wanted to cry in that moment, because I was just like, oh, is this how I'm like, is this really how I'm feeling? And it is how I'm feeling, but I didn't want to admit it. And it took my mentor of 10 years to like say, you need to probably hire a CEO, or you need to like find someone else to kind of work with these things, because not that I lost the mojo, but I've lost a lot of the passion and stuff. And a lot of it is because everything's going on. But anyway, so I can completely relate to what you're saying.
Yeah. And what this trifecta of self-sabotage does, and as you said, wanting to avoid conflict and then wanting to keep everybody else happy and sacrificing your own joy and your own fulfillment for other people. That's something that as women we've been indoctrinated for generations to do. It stifles us. It stifles our creativity. It suffocates our joy. It makes us sort of hide and retreat inside our shell because we don't then want to be seen. We don't, because we're not quite sure how you want. And it causes this crazy mess of suffering. And then we shrink, we hide. And then that doesn't benefit anyone in the world, because we should all be standing in our own light, in our own strength, in our own power, whatever that looks like for each of us.
Yeah. So I want to move into like when you're talking about, because obviously I'm in the like, let's get shit done, because we've got to like get these numbers up. We got to get the memberships. We got to do all these things. Yeah. So I want you to share your thoughts on leadership and how we move out of that mindset of get shit done to become more of a person of influence. Because I think I'll be able to take your advice and implement it for sure.
Yeah. So part of this trifecta of, procrastination, people pleasing, and perfectionism is an identity, again, which bides us well in our early careers, where we're that person who puts our hand up, we'll do it, we'll go above and beyond, we want to prove ourselves. And so we get this reputation as the get shit done person. We're the go-to person, we fix the impossible, we put out the fires, and we thrive off that. It gets us significance. It makes us feel good. It gets us promotions to a point. But get shit done people will always plateau, and they'll either plateau in terms of their career hierarchy if they're within an organization, or they'll plateau in terms of their organization's growth if they're an entrepreneur. Because at some point in time, we have to make this shift. And a lot of this comes from John Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership. He's one of the gurus of leadership frameworks. And when we are somebody who is sort of followed, or we lead from a place of our results, we have to continue to get results. We have to continue to get shit done. Our identity is completely tied to that, which means we can never rest, we can never stop, and we get stuck in output instead of outcomes. And so we're stuck in the weeds, we go round and round in circles, and then the perfectionism and all the self-sabotage programs really start amplifying. And then we just get stuck here. And this leads to overwhelm, and it will eventually lead to burnout because there's never enough time. And we do one thing and then it leads to 4 other things being added to our list. So the perception, let me just work Sunday night so I can get on top of my list. All we do is tick one thing off and add 5. Instead, as you start to make the shift where you are now becoming more of a woman of influence, where you're able to be that person who is able to see the big picture. One of my favorite analogies and stories I love to tell about making this transition is the difference between a tugboat and a lighthouse. So when you're a get shit done person, you're like the tugboat in the harbor. You are running around, you're taking the boats off the rocks, you're responding to fires, and you huff and you puff and all day long, and you tug and you push and you pull. And then particularly if you have a family, or you have, then there's like little baby tugboats behind you and you're all pushing and you're shoving together. You're very much stuck in the doing. It's that masculine energy. Whereas in contrast, the lighthouse just is there. The lighthouse isn't actually doing anything. The lighthouse shines its light bright. It is a beacon, and the one lighthouse can save hundreds of boats from crashing into the rocks simply because it's shining bright. It knows exactly its purpose. It is not running around like a headless chicken trying to deal with the latest fire. So yes, we all have to get shit done. We all have to be tugboats at some point in our time, in our days. But when you can consciously make the transition and say, okay, I need to have my lighthouse moment. Where am I going to shine bright? I need to stop. I need to be. What are my priorities right now? What really matters? And that might be that I need to take a nap, or I actually need to feed myself, taking that time as a woman to tap into what are our needs, what really is going on for us right now. Then we're able to be much more strategic, much more focused, much more impactful, and ultimately we get better results than spending our lives just trying to make our tugboat more efficient.
I love that analogy. I want to be the light.
Exactly, right? A bit of sparkle, a bit of glitter in there. We all need to be the light.
Yeah, for sure. And, and I feel like for me personally, it was like, I feel like I've had like a really great high and I've been the light, and then I went down, I became the tugboat, and then I became the light. And I feel like, at that plateau point is kind of where the company is and kind of where I feel like we are right now. So I think I'm taking that a lot personally as well. But I feel like your conversation is definitely inspiring me to want to become that light and be that person of influence as well, and not be the get shit done type of attitude, even though we need to do that. I like your approach on it as well. And I really appreciate that. What were you going to say?
Yeah, it's an identity shift. So that doesn't mean that we still, as a lighthouse, don't have to do stuff. We don't just get to sit there all day and go, and everything around us magically happens. But it's an identity that my worth is based on who I am. It's not based on what I do. So we shift that identity, and then becoming the lighthouse becomes more of a natural state of being as opposed to defaulting to tugboat mode.
Yeah, 100%. Joe, we are going to be wrapping it up soon. And so I would love for you to consider one thing, and it could be something you already mentioned as well, but if you could give any advice, any wisdom, or any encouragement to our listeners today, what is something that you would encourage them to try today or tomorrow? Or not even try, just to do?
Well, if they could ask themselves that question, what am I making this mean about me when something happens? When you get triggered, when you are emotional, when you're annoyed, when you are frustrated, when you are rereading that email 6 times that you've already sent, what am I making this mean? And simply pausing and taking that 10 seconds to ask that question can be the difference between you rolling into an emotion, can conserve so much more energy and ultimately reduce suffering and bring you much more joy and fulfillment into life, which is usually what we're all chasing.
Thank you so much. So before we go, please tell everyone how they can get a hold of you. How do they connect with you? How do they become a client of yours? How do they follow all of this great wisdom? Are you on Instagram, LinkedIn? What's your website? Give us all the skinny, because I'm sure people are going to want to connect with you, especially a lot of my listeners as well.
Yeah, so I have my own podcast called Balance and Beyond, which they can find on all podcast platforms, which, where I interview clients, other amazing females similar to you, where I love that we're all on this mission to empower women to lead their best lives. I also have a website. They can visit balanceinstitute.com, where I have free seminars, I have free workshops, things that they can watch on demand, sign up for. And on there, they'll also see details of my coaching program. So if they want to come work with me in a variety of different capacities at different price points, then they can come onto that website, see what we're doing. And best case, jump on a call with us. And all details are on the website to find out what we do and how we do it.
That's awesome. Jo, you're an inspiration. And I'm so proud of you too, just to be like, let's blow it up and start all over again. Like I said, I think that's a lot of bravery. And I think that's really encouraging for some of us as well, that we can do it. So thank you for sharing your story. I think it was wonderful. Thank you all for tuning in and listening today. I would love for you to consider 5 people that you can send this podcast to. Maybe they know someone that could benefit from the information and Jo's story as well. We always love knowing that what we're speaking about and what we're doing and the good work is really paying off and it's really helping people. So if you want to consider giving us a 5-star review, we'd greatly appreciate that. Once again, I want to encourage you to check out last week's episode as well. Dr. Alina is talking a little bit about the energy and, leaning in and leading with your heart, which could help a lot of leaders as well. So if you are in that space, obviously connect with Jo. She is brilliant. She has a lot to offer. And I'm looking forward to having you on the next podcast. Have a great day. Thank you for tuning into the Stroke It podcast. I hope you were inspired. I hope you're willing and ready to take some action. I want to encourage you to consider 5 people that could benefit from today's podcast. Super simple to share this episode. You never know who could benefit from hearing this podcast and how you could inspire them to create the change in the life that they're wanting. Cheers, and thank you so much for tuning in. Also, consider giving a review.